by name before speaking. For members in the room, please use raised hand. If you wish to speak, for members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And now we are resuming debate on the motion of Mr. Turnbull and the amendment of Mr. Howland, the sub-amendment of Mr. Morantz. And going back to my speaking order, MP Morantz is not here, so I have next MP Howland to speak.
Thank you, Chair.
MP Lawrence.
And I will concede the floor to my friend, Philip Lawrence, who will talk about this very common sense sub-amendment to a very common sense amendment. So I'll pass the floor over to
Thank you, MP Howland. And I do have another person to the list after MP Lawrence, MP Zarowitz.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it's candidly a little bit disappointing that we don't have the ability to talk to the Minister of Finance and Deputy Leader, Ms. Chrystia Freeland today. We were looking forward to having a robust discussion. I know myself, I've personally had many interesting discussions with Ms. Freeland, discussing such things as the gap in GDP per capita in the Canada and the U.S. and some of the financial struggles. So just to sort of set the stage, as it were, for the discussion that, and I unfortunately, I suspect a lengthy discussion as to where we are right now. And so what sort of, and I did, and I don't want to tell tales of the school, have a discussion with the parliamentary secretary, which was very upfront this morning, and I appreciate his candor. But the challenge is that we started sort of off on the wrong foot. And that he surprised us with a programming motion. So for those watching in the media or just simply at home watching, so programming motion sets up sort of the organization of the business. Normally this is done through a collaborative, cooperative process, even when parties are having very heated exchange over their various different ideas and thoughts as to how the government, there has to be certain administrative and procedural agreements. And in the last couple of years, while sitting on the Finance Committee, I've had the privilege to negotiate that with various Liberal members, including Mr. Terry Beach. Yvonne and I also had some chats as well in the interim, and certainly it was not always, I guess, friendly, but it was always respectful. And Mr. Beach, for example, would nearly always give me the opportunity to discuss and have input prior to a motion being brought forward. And while we didn't always agree, I very much appreciated that from the former parliamentary secretary, now Minister of Fixing Government, I believe is his title or something like that. And so I was very surprised when we came. In fairness, and I said I try to be as much as possible an advocate for the truth. So in fairness, there was a subcommittee meeting, but that meeting broke down, and I would have expected here's maybe a courtesy call, as candidly I got this morning, and I appreciate that. If I'm not telling tales of the school, Mr. Turnbull, and I would very much have appreciated a call beforehand, and maybe we would have had a discussion. And so what we've got is programming motion that called for really a very short amount of testimony, and I understand that the government and certainly the NDP actually brought a sub-amendment to increase that. So that's a positive. That's a positive sign. But this programming motion is still deficient in a number of different ways, and it's not. I want to sort of characterize this correctly too. It's not that I'm objecting for Philip Lawrence or the Conservative Party or Pierre Poilievre. I'm objecting for the people of Northumberland, Peterborough South. This is a massive document, over 600 pages, and I think even some of just the finite tax provisions in it could be the subject of lengthy debate and discussion, because anytime you're amending the Income Tax Act, it's a massive document, and there's nearly always knock-on effects from that amendment. And so we need significantly more, and I am pleased that that Mr. Davies did bring a sub-amendment to expand that, and I think that's a step in the right direction. The challenge is that Conservatives really want to know what the direction of the government is, and in order to know the direction of the government, we need to hear from them, and from not. We've certainly heard enough from their current leader, but we need to hear from their future leader to know what the direction is, to help us understand and convey that to our constituents. And so, for example, we have seen Prime Minister Trudeau been absolutely unequivocal that he is going to continue with his carbon tax, and that he's going to actually quadruple that carbon tax. And it said that there'll be no variation from this plan. In fact, his environment minister has said if in fact there's any deviation from the carbon tax, he will resign. And so that is absolutely crystal clear. What we don't know is what the Liberal plan is with respect to the carbon tax going forward, if there is a change in leadership. And so we have the deputy leader, who's of course one of the likely Liberal candidates, for 1 hour, but really that's not sufficient to discuss, even just in her role as Minister of Finance, much less as a future potential leader of the party, an hour to discuss a 600-page document that will affect every Canadian through one provision or another. And some of these are quite in-depth and quite, these are not simple provisions. And when we talk about some of the tax changes specifically, just one of those changes could easily take up 2 or 3 hours. And I would suspect that many individuals that haven't had the briefing that they fully need to fully understand some of the ramifications, right, of tax policy. So really, we need Ms. Freeland, the deputy leader and Minister of Finance, for at least 2 hours. And then the other challenge that Conservatives have, and that we would really like to hear from, is from Mark Carney. I think it's no surprise that to many Liberals, he is the heir apparent as we move forward. And I don't know whether we'll see a resignation from the Prime Minister or not. I don't know if he knows that, but clearly things are not going well. And while it doesn't appear as though that their members will push the Prime Minister out the door, it does appear as though he's frustrated, and clearly the economy and other factors are pointing to an early exit. And so, that being the case, there's a high likelihood that we're going to have Mark Carney as a new Liberal leader. And so what we're asking for is to have Mr. Carney, who has in the past been an outspoken advocate for the carbon tax. He's a huge proponent of the consumer-driven carbon tax. However, he's in recent years, recent days almost, I should say, including in recent Senate testimony, had seemed to equivocate. And when asked directly about it, he wouldn't give a yes or no answer. In fact, he quite adeptly equivocated, I guess, getting ready for his career in politics. And so we want to ask him: will a Carney-led Liberal government have a consumer carbon tax? We've heard the NDP actually equivocate on this point in recent months. There, the leader of the NDP stating that maybe the consumer-led carbon tax was not the best direction. And so while they continue to support and prop up the regime of Prime Minister Trudeau's Liberals, which is on track to quadruple that carbon tax, Canadians deserve to know whether the future Liberal or our future leaders, our candidates, whether Deputy Leader Freeland or former Governor of the Bank of Canada Mark Carney, would indeed support an interest would support a consumer carbon tax. The other issue that I would really like to talk to Mr. Carney about is what his thoughts are on the actions of the current governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem. Of course, during the pandemic, he said, Mr. Macklem said that interest rates would be low for long. He said that would be low for long, and you know what? Many Canadians relied on that, and so they selected variable mortgages. They had shorter renewal terms on their mortgages, thinking that interest rates would be, as Mr. Macklem said, unequivocally, I might add, it will be low for long. And so I would really like to know whether Mr. Carney would criticize Mr. Macklin's actions there. And then I'd also like to know, because our inflation doesn't seem to get down, and this is often the case with inflation. We saw this in the 70s and the 80s. Getting that first part of inflation down is oftentimes the quote unquote easy part. It's that last mile where inflation gets really sticky and hard to remove. And so we've heard past comments from Tiff Macklem saying that excessive government spending was unhelpful because it boosts demand, which will increase the prices and the costs of nearly everything, raising inflation. And so I'd love to hear from the future Liberal leader whether he would reduce spending or would he continue with the $54 billion of interest that the debt is being paid. That's more than the entire healthcare transfers. Just imagine if we did not have a national debt in Canada. If we did not have that national debt, we would be able to double our healthcare spending. That's really amazing, right? The other, and this is pointed out by Thomas Mulcair, former leader of the NDP government, is what he said, which is interesting, is that the amount of the interest is equal to the entire revenue collected by the goods and sales tax, the GST, across the country. So if we didn't have that $1.3 trillion national debt, we would be able to cancel the GST, the Liberal promise from many years ago, which still has, I guess, yet to come to fruition. And so when I think having Mr. Carney here is an absolutely reasonable request. He came before the Senate, so he's clearly not shy and has the opportunity to, or has a willingness to go before public officials. It does get to me. I try not to in politics, or as little as possible, speculate on people's intentions, because I do believe that most people's intentions are good, and I think you get into a dangerous world when you start speculating on the intentions of our colleagues, and it's hard to look into someone's heart, but it does make you wonder, like, what is the brakes here? What is the Liberal government afraid of, that they will not allow Mr. Carney to testify in front of the Finance Committee? I would maybe they're protecting. Maybe the Prime Minister prefers his successor to be the deputy leader, and he doesn't want Mr. Carney to come here and outshine him, or maybe it's a Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien type of thing, where they're afraid of Mr. Carney making too much of a splash here. I would hope it wouldn't be that Mr. Carney was afraid to answer questions. Clearly, as a governor of Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, he's hopefully faced tough questions. In fact, I'm mindful of an exchange that I saw between our current leader of the official opposition, Mr. Poilievre, in asking Mr. Carney some difficult questions. And I don't think anyone can say Mr. Carney did a great job of answering those questions. But if I were him, I might want to have an opportunity to redeem myself and to come before a finance committee. And if nothing else, just for altruistic reasons, I would think Mr. Carney would want to share his experience here with us. And so specifically on that, I have talked at length about productivity and the importance of economic growth in order to bring prosperity to our country. And I'm not the only one who, of course, there's a wide sympathy of voices across economic experts. I would rattle off the names of Bill Morneau, John Manley, the C.D. Howe Institute, the Fraser Institute. Even current Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has talked about it, and of course, most recently, Carolyn Rogers gave her famous "Break Glass" speech about productivity. The challenge, and you know who else has spoken about productivity is actually Mark Carney, and he's criticized his government for their lack of focus on economic growth and their lack of focus on productivity. And so I would welcome him into the discussion. It is a nut that Canada hasn't been able to crack, but it's and I said out of fairness, it has been a 30-year odd problem, but it's gotten significantly worse over the last 10 years. And you can see that comes through in the numbers, because if you look at a chart, and I tried to show the chart, but the chair said I wasn't allowed to use props, so I tried to show the chart to the Minister of Finance, but there's a clear departure in 2015 of GDP per capita in the United States of America versus GDP per capita in Canada, and that starts about 2015, 2016, and it's now wider. That gap between income per Canadian versus income per American, it has never been wider in recent history, like in the last 100 years. We have, and of course, the productivity crisis has led us to the lost decade in Canada. We've had virtually no economic growth in the last 10 years. Our GDP per capita has more or less been flat, and that really is an outlier. We are the worst in the G7 in the last 5 years in our growth of GDP per capita, and we continue to be a laggard. And actually, our GDP per capita is in our, I believe, a seventh negative quarter. And the question I would have asked Minister Freeland would be to ask her, have you looked at these numbers? Could you explain to the committee why our economy is the worst in the G7, looking at a GDP per capita lens? Why are Canadians having to suffer through the seventh quarter of declining GDP per capita? These would have been the questions I would ask Minister Freeland, and quite frankly, I'd put them to former Governor Mark Carney as well. We really need to have these discussions for the BIA because I think it's important for Canadians to know, and quite frankly, we need to start having the conversation now about the economic changes that Canada needs to get ourselves back on strong footing. And like I said, it's not just me talking about this. It is the C.D. Howe Institute, it's Bill Morneau, it's John Manley, it is the Fraser Institute, it's Ian Lee, it is Jack Mintz, noted economists, and it doesn't really matter whether they're left, right, or center. There's a near consensus across this country that the numbers are the numbers, and that we are struggling mightily when it comes to productivity. These challenges continue to plague our country as we go forward, and we really need to have a discussion, not just at the boardroom tables on Bay Street, but at the coffee shops on Main Street, about how Canada gets out of this economic hole. Because as my colleague Damien Kirk talked about a little bit in his speech last night in the House, he talked about the fact that when you're at the beginning, if you're driving or if you're piloting a boat or piloting a plane, and you've got a long journey, if early on in that journey you make even a slight error in navigation, that can have massive consequences down the lane. And we actually saw this underneath Pierre Elliott Trudeau. So, of course, Pierre Elliott Trudeau ran up massive deficits, and that left the Mulroney government in a difficult position. They actually ran structural surpluses, meaning that if you took out the interest payments which were accrued, or the debt that was accrued underneath the Trudeau government, every year underneath the Mulroney government, they actually took in more than they spent. Part of that was because of the tremendous economic growth, no doubt spurred on by the free market policies of the Mulroney government. But the challenge was what they carried along with them was a Pierre Elliott Trudeau legacy. And that's what we're really sadly at the beginning of a debt or deficit crisis, if we don't get ourselves back on course. Right now we're at $54 billion in interest, and sure, if the minister was here, I am sure the first response to some of my economic questions would be, we have a AAA credit rating, and that's true for now. The reality is, though, if we don't course correct on the debt and deficit, we won't, because sooner or later the interest gets to such a force. In fact, Albert Einstein said that the most powerful force in the universe is compounding numbers, or compounding interest, meaning that if you are on the wrong side of this, and that's what we are now, at the wrong side of this, with $54 billion of interest being paid, it starts consuming more and more, and eventually gets to a point where Canada will no longer be able to pay its bills. Already we're at the point where we're spending more on interest than we are on healthcare, and there's more interest being paid than the entire amount collected by the GST. Like, alarm flags should be coming out. The challenge too is that there is a bit of a spiral effect in this as well. So the more resources in general, and I'm sure my NDP colleague might add some caveats in here, I'm sure, that the businesses have to be spending their money on investment. They have to be spending their money on their workers, and quite frankly, I agree with him on that. But in general, the more resources the private sector has, the more effective they can be at investing, innovating, and becoming competitive and creating prosperity for the country. As you suck more and more of the the revenue of wealth from the private sector and give it to the public sector, not for goods, not for virtuous services like, for example, some of our social safety net or healthcare or productive resources, but just to give to banks and bondholders in the form of interest payments, you reduce the efficiency, the effectiveness of the economy. And so what happens is the economy actually starts to shrink, which means there's less revenue, which means the government has to increase rates. And then it goes back again. Then the economy shrinks more. Then rates go up more. And you get into this negative sort of debt spiral trap. And we've seen this in non-advanced economies, and it's had devastating consequences. And we've had many economists talk about this. And so what we need to do is get our spending under control. The leader has put forward a dollar for dollar plan. The leader of the official opposition, saying that for every new dollar that we need to spend, and there'll certainly be new dollars that we have to spend, we're going to match that with savings from somewhere else. And this government has talked about potential savings, but as the member from Simcoe North has talked about, is that while in fact the government has plan to generate savings through attrition in the public sector. They have yet to sort of publish any type of plan that will allow it to happen. So all that we see is a government that continues to spend more and more money. And the member from Abbotsford, he's gone. We got what happened there? I was so involved there. We've got a new member to the left of me. Ed Fast is gone. Marty Morantz is gone.
Normally to the right.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. You are. Yeah. And so, as a member from Ed Fast, the member from Abbotsford, has talked about many times, we can't let that spending get out of control, and the reason is not because Conservatives want in any shape or form any type of austerity when it comes to government or otherwise, but it's to prevent austerity. The type of austerity we saw during the 90s era underneath the Chrétien Martin Liberal government, when they dramatically cut healthcare transfers because the debt, which was largely accrued underneath Pierre Elliott Trudeau, had gotten to such a point where banks and bondholders basically cut the country off. And so that led to very, very dramatic reductions in healthcare transfers and other spendings. Conservatives want to protect that healthcare and other government spending by making sure that we are fiscally responsible now. And so if the Minister of Finance, a deputy leader, were here, she would no doubt tell me that we are actually, Mr. Lawrence, we're on track to hit all three of our guardrails. The reality is, though, that's on very shaky ground, and I'll tell you why. A number of the economic forecasts in the budget have very positive, bullish forecasts, such as increasing the GDP. The other issue that they have is that we haven't yet seen the capital gains legislation, and they need, in order to make that budget work, they need $7 billion in the first year from the capital gains. Otherwise, they miss two of the three guardrails, and I confirmed that with testimony with the PBO, and that those guardrails being the debt to GDP ratio not increasing and the deficit not increasing, and so they would miss 2 out of 3 of those guardrails, and quite frankly, right now that capital gains legislation just hasn't appeared. And you might say, well, Mr. Lawrence, you know what? Like, we've got the whole year to gain additional revenue from the capital gains, so just relax. I'm sure it'll be, and we might even get some retroactively. But no, that's not the case here, because the government has set up an artificial fire sale by saying that the legislation goes in place June 24th and June 25th. And so I have no doubt that there are Canadians right now who are preparing to sell their property to take advantage of the current capital gains rate as opposed to what it would be. But until there's certainty and Canadians know that the capital gains is actually going up through the introduction of legislation, I'm sure that there are many that are just waiting to see whether this legislation will actually come into a place or not. And that we're quickly approaching June 20, I think it's 24th. I can never remember if it's 24th or 25th. We're quickly approaching that timeline. And if the government doesn't introduce this capital gains legislation, which for political purposes they decided to pull out of the budget, they will not hit 2 out of 3 of their guardrails, which means we have more spending, which is going to put us further down that spiral, that debt and deficit spiral going forward, which will worsen our economic growth. We are already, as I've said, last I checked in, Mr. Davies wasn't sure whether he agreed with me or not, but I'll say it again, and maybe I'll have a chance to agree or disagree. We'll see. That it's my contention that while Canada's GDP growth has been just high enough to keep us out of a quote-unquote technical recession, if you look at the GDP per capita or the economic reality of the average Canadian, that has been negative for much more than 2 quarters continuously, the definition of a technical recession. In fact, we're in 7 quarters. And that would actually that means that while Canada as a country is not in recession, Canadians are. In fact, we are in one of the longest recessions that has occurred since the Great Depression, and that is a great segue to talking about what Philip Cross said, saying that in terms of GDP per capita or the economic circumstances of the average Canadian, we are in the worst economy since the Great Depression. So when we look at the severity and the seriousness of the economic situation we're in, I don't think Conservatives are being unreasonable. I really don't. By asking for two things. One, really three things in total, one of which has already been agreed upon, which is additional hours of study. And for 665 pages, I don't think 30 hours is much. In fact, I've actually thought that maybe a good change in process here. So if those who don't know, parliamentarians get a technical briefing for maybe a couple hours, of which we are responsible for within 24 hours reading 665 pages of extremely technical information. And by the by, when you say 665, those 665 are actually amending thousands of other pages. And in order to understand those 600 or so pages of amending legislation, you have to understand the other thousands of pages of legislation. So one of the changes to the process, while I have the floor here, that I'd love to put forward to the government for the next budget would be actually have members of the bureaucracy who many have great depth of understanding of these changes and the context around them. Each of them give a presentation of maybe 5 or 10 minutes on the substantive on the substance of the changes. And so there might be in a budget, I don't know, maybe 100 different substantive changes. And so it might be a couple days. I would certainly sign on to working from dawn up till to sundown to fully understand that and to gain some of the knowledge that's held in our bureaucracy transferred to the politicians. And so that's one of the changes I thought would be a great idea. And I was actually a little bit surprised, Mr. Davies, for although he did, in fairness, ask for additional time, and I appreciate that, and Conservatives agree, said that some of the testimony got repetitive. I think I didn't really see that, but to the extent that it did, I think that we could have eliminated that by having the public service put forward a substantive discussion of each one of the provisions that are being changed. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's unreasonable when you look at the provisions that are in place that are going to affect literally every Canadian from coast to coast to have that millions, even billions of dollars, maybe in some cases, quite frankly, like if you look at the entire global trillions of dollars, to have a discussion of each one of the objects for 5 or 10 minutes and let them present to parliamentarians about the substance of the issue. And I think if we did that, we would give parliamentarians a good base to then have fruitful, meaningful, constructive discussions about the individual areas. And because, like I said, the way the budgetary process works is so when we have the briefing, it was within 24 hours. And by the by, the night before, we were working hard at finance, trying to get the fall economic statement through, which left us very little time to study those 600 odd pages and to really fully understand that budget. And then instead of being briefed on some of the technical provisions, we were just sort of told, okay, ask any questions you want. Well, I certainly did my best to try and review and understand it, but it's hard to consume that massive amount of information in a very short period of time. And that's why I believe that I think a great change to the budgetary process would be to have members of the bureaucracy brief us on each one of those changes. So, like I said, if there's 100 changes at 5 minutes pop or 10 minutes pop, might be 500 or 1,000 minutes. That's each one of those minutes is compared to changes. I'm sure is hundreds of thousands of dollars of changes that will affect for each minute. And so, like I said, I would throw that out as a constructive suggestion. Now, I do want to sort of respond to what I expect will be some comments from the parliamentary secretary, amongst others, that Conservatives are holding up this legislation, and I think, quite frankly, our track record, specifically over the beginning of this year, actually rebuts that quite conclusively. If you look at the clause by clause, so this is where the rubber meets the road when we as parliamentarians decide on what's in the legislation and what's not in the legislation. We Conservatives were actually agreeable at candidly the NDP's request to start grouping sections so that we could move quickly. In fact, my colleague, Mr. Singh Halan, he actually withdrew some of his amendments so that we could get the fall economic statement in quickly. And I would also point to the fact that it was actually a very constructive process where my colleague, Mr. Chambers, said he had, in his considerable experience, seen a budget amended as thoroughly as the fall economic statement implementation was. And so it was a constructive, thorough process. Conservatives were willing to do that going forward. We have, I think, a very reasonable. I won't even put it as a demand. I'll put it as a request to have Mr. Mark Carney for at least 3 hours, and then to have the deputy leader and Minister of Finance for 2 hours. And quite frankly, I don't. Like I said, I don't like it when people speculate on my intentions. I don't think it's fair, and so I try not to do so as well. But I guess I would just throw this out as free advice to the side. Like, Minister Freeland is a very intelligent, eloquent speaker, and so if I were them, I would try and get Minister Freeland up as much as I could. And Mr. Carney has always acquitted himself fairly well. I'm not exactly sure why they're afraid of having two of their future leaders answer some questions. And as Minister Freeland has said before, certainly our exchanges in the past have been respectful. And I don't believe I asked Minister Freeland any inappropriate questions, tough questions, but that's sort of the job, and it's my job to ask those questions to make sure that the people of Canada and the people of Northumberland, Peterborough South, soon to be Northumberland Clark, are given the answers they know, so they understand, and because when we look at this in context, and of course during the early part of our calendar of a year as parliamentarians, a fair amount of our time is spent in our constituency, and I'm like everyone else, all other 337 of my colleagues spend a lot of time out at events talking to people, and soon we'll be on the barbecue circuit as well, talking to thousands of people, and it in all sincerity, it really hit home. I've never had a series of interactions like I have in the last, call it 2 or 3 months, with nearly every individual saying one of two things, or both. One is, I am really struggling. I've never had these economic conditions before. I've never gone to a food bank. In fact, I have a lifetime of donating to food banks, and now I'm a recipient of the food bank. These are very serious issues, and I'm sure we've all gotten those calls or emails or direct one-on-one interactions. I don't think I'm in a vacuum at all. And so having the deputy finance leader here for 2 hours and having the future Liberal leader, Mark Carney, here for 3 hours to explain their economic plans, their commentary on why Canada is in such a terrible economic shape, I think is quite frankly a reasonable position to be. Like we will right now agree to the scheduling put forward by the NDP and the Liberals, and all we're asking is that we get a little bit of insight from the for 2 hours from the current finance.
Point of order, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt your stream of consciousness riveting speech, Mr. Lawrence. I just wanted to make a quick point. It's not really a point of order, but I'll just make a quick comment that might be helpful. The Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, is here and willing to appear today. We had committed to that. You've said multiple times in your speech today that you'd like to ask your tough questions to the Minister of Finance. So I would just respectfully seek unanimous consent so that we can pause this debate, return to it after her appearance, and that way you get your questions in.
Well, it was not a point of order, but the members have heard what P.S. Turnbull has had to say. I don't know if members want to speak to that. MP Lawrence?
Conservatives are agreeable to that.
The Conservatives are agreeable to that, you see? Okay. Great. You may continue. Is the... wait. Sorry. The point of order. So, is the bloc NDP agreeable to this? Yes. Also. Okay. Okay. MP Lawrence, the floor is yours still.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry, just for
and then I've got MP Chambers after that.
Yeah, thank you. No, my question. So we are agreeable to the UC. What time is the minister coming?
12 o'clock.
12 o'clock. Okay. So we'll just continue on debate until 12 o'clock. Chair, is that what the plan is?
Yeah.
We can suspend if you want. It's as riveting as my speech was.
Members, I'm looking to everybody. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Minister Freeland, thank you very much for extending a opportunity to have you come here before our committee, and the members have agreed to that. So you'll be here with us from 12 to 1, and we will be discussing the budget and C-69. So on that, Minister, you may have some opening remarks. I also want to welcome Mr. Janovic. I hope maybe you want to help me out with that.
You were close, Jovanovic.
Jovanovic, of course, great name, yeah, Jovanovic. And I'm sure the members have many questions for you, Minister. And now you'll have an opportunity to provide some opening remarks, and then we'll get to members' questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm very happy to appear before you and the members of the committee to discuss the Budget Implementation Act. This is intended to put into effect a very large number of budgetary measures. Those measures are found in the BIA, are intended to offer a fair share for all generations, and that deals also with more affordable housing. The Generation Z is having great difficulty becoming property owners, as well as the millennials. If we want to be able to put in place certain measures,
by cracking down on short-term rentals and by banning foreign buyers of Canadian homes. We're making life cost less, and we're strengthening Canada's social safety net for every generation, from expanding the Canada Student Loan Forgiveness Program to workers across healthcare and social services who work in rural and remote communities, to launching a national school food program, to making switching internet and phone plans easier and more affordable. We're also increasing investment and productivity, including by delivering 2 more major investment tax credits to attract more private investment, create more good-paying jobs, and grow the economy. Mr. Chair, these investments are built upon a fiscally responsible plan. Last week, Moody's, one of the leading credit ratings agencies, reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating with a stable outlook. Moody's also predicts that, over the medium term, Canada will see more growth than some other AAA economies, and that inflation will remain near the Bank of Canada's midpoint target of 2%. This is a powerful, independent, objective proof point. A AAA credit rating means Canada's economy is strong and resilient. It means our economic plan is fiscally responsible. It means we can afford to make the investments Canada needs and create the good jobs Canadians need. It means the federal government can responsibly invest and borrow at lower costs, as can other orders of government and Canadian businesses. Notre cote de crédit AAA montre également.
Our AAA credit rating shows that any type of incendiary statement that is made is misleading to Canadians. The government's plan is a very responsible plan. The reality is that many politicians do not want to make the necessary investments to help young Canadians, whereas the Conservative Party is looking for excuses to not make investments in the future of Canadians. Our government is acting to ensure Canadians' future. That is why our government is implementing the BIA as quickly as possible to help young Canadians who are counting on us. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
And we're going to go to our first round of questions. And I just wanted to, Minister, I'm sure you are aware, we do have some new a new member to our committee, MP Don Davies for the NDP, and a new PS Ryan Turnbull here on committee. And now to our first round of questions. We're starting with each party will have up to 6 minutes. We're starting with MP Holland, please, for the first 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, do you think it was fair to increase the carbon tax 23% when 70% of Canadians told you not to, as 2 million Canadians visit a food bank in a single month? Was that fair?